We've talked a lot about the opportunities in markets. Where are there the risks? What is it that's keeping you up at night and that has you worried?
I think one of the things that always keeps me up at night is the risk of a policy mistake. I tell people, look, every time I checked, every one of the central banks around the world, the pencils come equipped with erasers at the top. There's no infallibility. Vatican City is the only place that claims infallibility. Central bankers do not have that, nor do they claim it. And we have to also understand we're living through what has been the greatest monetary policy experiment in history. We've never seen this before. I grew up in an environment where early in my career as a fixed income strategist, and I was led to believe that zero interest rates were a lower bound. Well, apparently that's been put on its head because apparently rates can go below zero. So we've had a change in the rate dynamic, but we've also seen a much different approach in terms of how central banks are willing to expend and expand their balance sheets. Think about the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan. What they've all engaged in is this extraordinary balance sheet expansion that commonly has been known as quantitative easing. So that's been extraordinary in terms of helping stabilize markets and allow the economy to recover. But now we're in the process of the beginning, the very early stage of policy normalization. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge because we haven't been here before, so there is no rule book, there's no guidepost to how we do this. So I think what's going to require is very prudent actions by central bankers. They're going to have to be cautious in terms of how they apply policy changes. They have to be very transparent and open with markets about what they intend to do and what they are doing. So I'd say if you ask me what the biggest concern I have is, it's for a policy misstep map. It's that somewhere along the line central bankers, they get it wrong. Either they move too quickly or they move too slowly.
Yeah, so I'd say a few different things. I'll take a couple different directions. One, of course, there is the possibility that in the unwind of QE, something huge happens. I think that that's more likely to stem from another region of the globe outside the US. Not huge likelihood, but it worries me. Second, the US politics, and I don't want to get too deeply into that area, but it's definitely volatile, and we're seeing some political dynamics we haven't seen before. The US does have a pretty robust system of checks and balances, so our core guess is that will be okay, but there's certainly a bit more risk. Third thing would be some sort of, and I hate to say this, some sort of terrorist incident. Again, not something I think is overly likely, but it is a worry. My biggest worry actually in terms of probability is the least exciting or interesting one, which is just the natural aging of the cycle. The reality is unemployment has come down a lot. Participation rate has gone up. We've started to burn through some of the slack in the labor economy. When that starts to happen, you start to see wages coming up. And though you haven't seen that as much in the headline numbers, you've seen it a bit in some of the second order numbers underneath that. With that, you tend to get rising rates. You eventually start to get investor over-optimism, management over-optimism, and the classic end of a cycle. We think that's the most likely thing to happen. We don't think it's started yet, but to use the classic baseball analogy, we think we're probably in the 7th inning.
Certainly what happens with interest rates and inflation is number one. I think that there are other things like the North Korea situation, which I think day to day, it's something that hits the headlines and may move markets over the short term, but then the market kind of reprices and normalizes these things out. But I do think there's something a little bit different about this North Korea crisis, because we are reaching a point where this nation, North Korea, may be able to send missiles to the United States, and that hasn't been resolved yet with the American people. So I think there will be another stage to this. Again, it doesn't have to be a market event, and it doesn't have to be resolved in what was recently called an ugly way, but it will need to be resolved or accepted at some point in the future.